Gabriel Valdivia. I am really excited to be here today. I'm a designer, and I'm currently working on Patreon. I'd like to tell you a bit about myself. I spent the last 10 years working with some of the biggest tech companies out there. Um, in 2012, I joined a small startup named Automatic, where we worked on the future of connected cars. We built a device that gave users a peek into a car's computer and empowered them to use the data to make driving more safe, fuel efficient, and fun. After that, I spent 4 years at Facebook, where we explored the future of social storytelling and media in virtual reality. And then at Google, I spent 2 years working on a team that focused on building technology for social good, especially tools for fighting misinformation and censorship. For today's talk, I'd like to take us to a simpler time, a time when I didn't own a single face mask, and I didn't think twice about going outside. So the year was 2019, and a company called Canopy launched a product called Tonic. Now, Canopy was a small startup based in Dumbo, New York City. If you don't know Dumbo, it's that place in New York where every tourist takes an Instagram photo. Anyway, Canopy's founders were responsible for a feature in Spotify called Discover Weekly, which automatically generates playlists that recommends you new artists based on your listening activity. If you've ever used Discover Weekly before, you've probably been delighted by its recommendations. They feel uniquely curated and personal to you. But while at Spotify, Canopy's co-founders were struck by a problem they wanted to solve. That problem is that people are growing increasingly distrustful of technology. Privacy leaks and existential threats to democracy cause people to think twice about downloading your app. And screen time is higher than ever, and people find themselves addicted and feeling lousy about using technology. So we asked ourselves, like, how do we get here? Like, what happened in the last 10, 15 years that we now feel this way about using technology? Well, we think that it all started with the Web 2.0 about 15 years ago. And for those of you too young to remember, the Web 2.0 was this idea that the internet could enable people to create and share their own content with others. This paved the way to online communities that enable a lot of creativity and self-expression. That's great. Now, this trend was accelerated by an introduction of the iPhone and the rise of smartphones. With the Web 2.0 in our hands, we could now post anything from anywhere. This led to an exponential growth in the amount of user-generated content. So viral moments were created, and the internet, as we know it, started to take shape. Then these platforms found themselves with more content than any person could ever consume. So naturally, companies turned to personalization algorithms to show only the interesting bits to their users. At the time, the only way they knew how to do this was by collecting a bunch of personal data and uploading it to their servers to train their algorithms. And this was the beginning of the cloud. Then a business model was developed where companies packaged and resold that data so advertisers could better target across platforms. And then to measure the success of these models, companies began optimizing for engagement. The more people interacted with the products, the more value they thought they were. So the cloud, business models, and success metrics led to a misalignment of incentives between product makers and their users. As a result, every website or app now asks for your email, your phone number, or even your credit card in exchange of a marginally better user experience. Now, companies use this data to create an assumption of who we are on the web and traffic it without our explicit consent. To top it all, we can't change or escape that assumption. So it's as though every time we pop into our local bodega to buy a loaf of bread, they checked our ID and reviewed our purchase history. This has become the price of admission for the internet. Now, when we started Canopy, we wanted to make a different kind of software. We wanted to make software that was private by default. We wanted to provide delightful discoveries, like Discover Weekly, but this time we wanted to do it privately, without collecting personal data. We also wanted to create software that gave users unprecedented control over their experience. And finally, we wanted to make software that could nurture a mindful and sustainable consumption experience. So our first goal was to create a consumer experience that showcased Canopy's unique approach to building products. So we assembled a small cross-functional team to do just that. I joined as head of design and worked with folks across product, engineering, and editorial to craft our first consumer product. We knew the team could do audio recommendations really well. So we tried stepping outside our comfort zone and built a product that recommended you things to read. And we call that product Tonic. Now, Tonic was a really simple app. Every day, the app combined machine learning and human editors to scour the web and find the most interesting articles to read, curated just for you. We wanted Tonic to equip you to tell the best stories at a dinner party. And the app learned from your activity and fine-tune the recommendations as you go. Now, the catch is there are no accounts, and you don't have to log in. Everything lives on the device, and you have full control of your data. So I want to walk you guys through 3 kind of user experience challenges that we encountered as we were building this, following those principles. The first is how to explain to folks how this works. We built a system that privately recommends content without requiring any user data to be read by the server. So to do this, we use a technique called differential privacy. Now, differential privacy is a system for sharing information about a data set by describing the patterns of a group while withholding information about the individuals. Now, I don't know what that means either, but basically, this is what we did. We looked at the activity in your app, so what you choose to tap on, how long you spend on an article, et cetera. Then we create a profile of your interests. Then we add noise to that profile and make it mathematically impossible to decipher who you are. And we send that to the server, where we collect new pieces of content recommended to you. Then we select the ones that we think you're really going to love, and then we download those items into your phone, which acts as a filter to show only the relevant bits to you when you open the app. So the person's identity is encrypted on the phone, and the server never knows who they're recommending content to. They just know what they like. This is important because at any point, the user can walk away and remove their identity from the equation and leave no footprint behind. So we wanted to explain this process in the app when you first downloaded it. We use diagrams and abstractions to explain what's happening behind the scenes. But we didn't really know if this was really coming through to our users. We were a small team, so we didn't really have a user research staff. And we didn't want to rely exclusively on our intuition to decide whether the solution was the right call. So we started a beta program and gathered feedback from over 1,000 people. We sent out user surveys and conducted regular user interviews as well. Another way we gathered feedback was by adding a feedback button right in the app. So at any time, users could tap that button in the top left and send us a message that would go straight into a Slack channel. So that was a really helpful tool to get unfiltered access to what users were really thinking, what was working, what wasn't, even feature requests. And everything was done anonymously. So through all this feedback, we gathered 3 key pieces of insight. 1, people don't read. So when you download an app, the last thing you want to do is read a paragraph of text explaining how the app works. Instead, we found the most successful approach to explaining an app's mechanics is to show how it works rather than telling you how it works. The second is that trust is lost, not earned. No matter how deep we went on explaining differential privacy, we found folks to have little patience to think through how it worked in the background. Instead, they were willing to take a leap of faith until their trust was broken by the app. And the final one is that people like people. We found that the most successful approach was not showing a diagram of the process, but showing faces and people conveying a feeling. So we went from this flow, when you first downloaded the app, to this flow. We used concise language and colorful imagery to convey a simple value prop and the desired feeling we wanted to achieve by using our app. Now, once onboarded, users could start using the app. But remember, there was no need for users to create an account. So our next challenge was, how do we know what you're going to like the first time you open the app? We have no idea who you are. Like, other apps will dump you into a flow for you to choose categories and interests. But we found that to be really grating, just like work to be done. Instead, we showed users a sample of the content they could find behind the app. They could read the articles right there. Their first task was to select 5 articles that they wanted to read by adding it to their bookmarks. And this helped us accomplish 2 goals. One, we introduced people to bookmarking, which is the main action they'd be performing when using Tonic. And 2, we avoided the ghost town problem and make sure that users always had something to read, even on day 1. So based on their selections, we assigned users to one of 11 archetypes, which would give us a starting point for recommendations. These archetypes were based on the zodiac signs. The kinds of archetypes where none of them are wrong, that you could see yourself as part of all of them. In this example, I am imaginative, meditative, and blissful. We found that people really enjoyed this opportunity for the app to show them and for them to feel seen by the product. So how do you teach people the basics about your app? Well, first, you use human language and imagery. Then you take advantage of your first impression to teach the basic mechanics. And then you give users immediate rewards for their investment. OK, the second challenge was how to create this idea of mindful consumption and avoid making you feel overwhelmed when you first entered the app. We also wanted to avoid the feeling of FOMO, like the app always had content for you to consume. We wanted you to be more intentional and just save time to consume the content whenever you were ready. So our goal was to give people a reason to come back to the app without relying on engagement mining and growth tactics. So we decided to apply the old adage of using quality over quantity. So we created a constraint, and instead of doom scrolling through an infinite feed of content like every other app out there, we bundled the best content into 5 recommendations every day. So this made the app feel fresh and gave you a reason to come back every day without having to rely on growth hacks or annoying notifications. Each bundle is uniquely tailored to you based on what the app knows that you're going to love. In it, there are 4 articles we know you're going to love for sure based on the art and the interest that we've gathered from your activity. But there's also one wild card, and that is the best from a topic that you may not be typically exposed to. And that's how we try to delight and surprise people, through our recommendations, by bursting you out of your bubble and introducing you to a topic you might be familiar with or a publication you might not know. So now that we know the app's mechanic, let's talk about the app's structure. So we knew we wanted to have a home tab where you could see your daily recommendations and pick the ones that you like to read. If you don't have time to read an article, you can bookmark it for later. And every article you've ever read or rated gets saved into an activity tab so that you have a clear sense of what the app thinks you like. So in other words, we have a temporal structure for the app. Activity is everything that happened in the past. Home is everything that you can read in the present. And bookmarks is where you store what you want to read in the future. Let's look at home for now. So we wanted to make the app feel simple and intuitive. So we designed the Home tab to show you everything you needed to see at a glance. First, each recommendation is displayed as a beautiful card where the content can shine and feel like something worthy of your time. When you read a recommendation, it moves away from the recommended stack and into the last open section, so you can easily pick up where you left off. And then below it, there's the rest of the articles that you've saved for later. So like this, the Home tab is showing you a quick glance of everything you can read every time you open the app. If you want to explore all your bookmarks, you can tap an icon in the top right. And if you want to understand your recommendations, the Activity tab can be accessed from the top left. So let's look at it in action. So here you can see a design where the cards are displayed at the top, and you can decide whether you want to read one of your recommendations or one of your unopened tabs. Unopened bookmarks, sorry. If you click the card, you enter a kind of custom immersive browser that we designed that, again, was private. It didn't track any cookies, and there was no tracing of your identity as you browse the internet. After you're done reading the article, with a simple gesture, you can dismiss it, and it moves from your recommended stack into the last open section. Now, if you want to save the next card for later, you just tap that bookmarks icon, and it moves to your unopened bookmarks section. So how do you introduce mindful consumption into your app? Well, you lean on quality over quantity when presenting content to your users. You find opportunities to introduce surprise and delight. And then you keep the navigation really simple and intuitive, meeting users where they are. OK, so the last UX challenge I'd like to talk about today is how to give control over their recommendations to users. So we've all been there when YouTube auto-plays a video that we don't really like, or the next song in the playlist just kind of kills the vibe. We wanted to avoid that. We wanted the control features to be a first-class citizen in the app. The feeling wanted was something akin getting a mixtape from your buddy. You know, some of the songs in that mixtape may be bangers, others may not. So we wanted to kind of create a back and forth between the user receiving the recommendations and the system providing those recommendations. First, we looked at how companies implemented control features across different products. When we looked at Apple News, Twitter for text, Pandora for music, TikTok for video. And we noticed a few kind of key takeaways here. So users tend to have either a binary option, like thumbs up or thumbs down, or favoring something, hearting something. And this can be like too limiting and kind of harsh. You know, sometimes a recommendation is just OK, and the user has no way of sending that signal to the system. The other option is to use a rating spectrum, kind of like a 5-star rating system. You see this a lot in Yelp and other reviews apps like that. But we found this approach to be a little confusing. Like, are 2 stars awful or kind of good? Or, you know, like, how do you know where the bar is there? And then the third insight that we found is that negative feedback tends to create really high expectations. When you say you don't like something, if you see something else like it, all of a sudden you start to lose trust in the recommendation engine. So we decided to implement a spectrum of positive feedback that looks something like this. We have 4 degrees of positive feedback on the right, and 1 option to dismiss the recommendation altogether if it just didn't hit the mark. So we went from all right to good to great and love, and we used kind of like this imagery to represent it. We prototyped this version where you could long press on any article that you see, and then this UI would come up, and you would select kind of the rating that you would give it. Again, we tested this with our users and found that this wording was still a little bit ambiguous, but the interaction felt really good. That night, I went home, and I was playing Zelda, Breath of the Wild, which is an amazing game. And I noticed one quintessential UI detail of that game. And every Zelda game has used a heart divided by 4 quadrants to indicate your health. And it's a really simple way of showing your health in the game. At that moment, my mind was focused on rating systems and how do we create a positive rating system. When playing this, I created something that we lovingly refer to as the Zelda hearts. And the UI just indicates how much you love something. So you have, on the left, if you don't love it at all, you can dismiss it. And then from there, you have different degrees of love. And it seems pretty simple, but it took us a while to get there. So it works something like this. Anytime you are seeing an article you've read, we show a heart indicating how much we think you enjoyed it. At any point, you can correct that rating and teach the algorithm what you like. Just long press on the article and drag your thumb to that rating. Then the heart updates to reflect your desired rating. Now, the user feels like they have control over the recommendations that they're getting, and they're an active participant. They can send a signal back to the system, as opposed to how you get recommendations on Netflix or Facebook or Twitter, where it's just a kind of a black box. So we learned 3 key takeaways here. Having an activity feed with full transparency on what the algorithm thinks you like is something users really appreciate. And once they have the visibility for that, they can correct the recommendations to make sure they're just right. And then we found that positive feedback is much more effective at gauging someone's interest in something. So that's how we look at how we apply design principles to create an experience that was private by default, controllable, and mindful. The app was really well received by our users and the press. Here are a few of the App Store reviews that we received, and our average rating was 4.8, which we're really proud of. Then we took all these principles and we open sourced them. We called them sensible design. And our hope is that the entire design community can kind of piggyback of this starting point and see if they could apply similar concepts into the products they're working on. And as I mentioned before, we launched the product in 2019. Shortly after its launch, Canopy was acquired by CNN to leverage the team, the technology, and the design principles towards a larger kind of news bet. Earlier this year, I joined Patreon. And Patreon is a company that it's also an underdog like Canopy was. Patreon tries to use a new business model for creators out there to fund creativity and art on the internet, and to move away from where we are now, which is very much ad-based business models, into something that is more direct with its fans. Here's a 2-minute video explaining what Patreon is.
Patreon exists because when creators are paid, they can create more amazing things. Things that inspire us, teach us, challenge us, things that make us laugh. Patreon is a membership platform that makes it really easy for creators to get paid. We're using the idea of patronage, which is actually a really old idea.
Exactly, Jack. If it weren't for patrons, we wouldn't have Romeo and Juliet or Mona Lisa. Mozart, Shakespeare, Da Vinci, they all had patrons, mostly aristocrats who paid them to create so they could enjoy their works and brag to their friends about how cool they are for supporting creators.
Yeah, so it's kind of like that, but better. Creators of every kind, podcasters, YouTubers, musicians, writers, allow their fans to become patrons or members. Patrons set a monthly subscription-style payment for the level of membership they want. Like for $5 a month, you get early access to content. $10 a month, extra videos. $20 a month, behind-the-scenes stuff. You name it. This provides creators with a sustainable income while retaining full creative control. And it allows fans to connect with them on a whole new level.
We have the flexibility to create without having to necessarily worry about how that's going to impact us financially. And that level of freedom is, I can't tell you how important that level of freedom is.
Thousands of creators and creative teams are using Patreon to run their business their way. They're doing what they love and they're being paid to do it by the people who love their work most. So if you're a professional creator, start a page and give your fans the opportunity to become patrons. It could help you do the best work of your life.
So core to this idea is that we're in this inflection point where the way we understand the internet and what happens out there is changing. Recommendation systems and what they require from us as users are changing. And the way we create content, the way we are rewarded for that content is changing. So the reason I kind of come here and chat about it is to see how design can play a role in that, how we can use design to validate some of these ideas and push these ideas forward. Now, I would be remiss if I don't mention that we're hiring. So if any of this sounds interesting to you and you want to make similar experiences at a larger scale, please reach out. But other than that, thank you. That's all I'm free.
Give it up for Gabriel. Okay, cool. We got a few questions here. Taylor would like to know, can you elaborate on how the select 5 stories onboarding solved the ghost town problem? Any other ideas you explored to solve the ghost town?
Yeah, so the ghost town problem is every time you start a new app, you create an account. At Facebook, we run into this all the time. When you create a Facebook account, you have no friends. So if you have no friends on Facebook, you have a pretty bad experience. And that is a pretty quintessential problem for products, how to kickstart it. Our thinking was that by presenting people with articles right away and having them kind of create a stash of content that they could consume, they would never see an empty feed that they haven't kind of emptied themselves. So that was our kind of approach to kickstarting you and getting you in the process of using the app.
Awesome. Justin wants to know, how did you address the, quote, I need to see it to believe it, quote, end quote, crowd that knows while camouflaged data can always be monetized and has an origin source?
Yeah, there's a lot of skepticism on privacy because we've just been burned for so long. One thing we did is that we made all this information readily available, like our terms and conditions were written in human language that you could read. You don't need to be a lawyer to understand it. So we directed people there. And so if people wanted to learn about it, they could hopefully understand it. And then we built kind of safe gates where we wouldn't be able to share people's data even if we wanted to. Even if our CEO left and a new one would come in and had a different vision for the product, we built kind of safeguards on the product so that that wouldn't be possible. So our promise to the user was not that we pinky promise that we're not going to sell their data. Our promise is that we can't sell their data. So that was our approach.
Awesome. How would you recommend people starting the conversation about flipping their model to private by default?
Yeah, I think it depends on your organization. I think there are alternatives to achieving the same outcomes. A lot of consumer products are based on retention or engagement. Out of those two, retention is a much healthier metric to follow. So if you're part of an organization that is following an engagement as the metric by which you define a product successful or not, I would first start there, define or tweak the way you define success within your product. And then just provide alternatives to what we all take for granted. There are already many products out there that apply similar principles that are equally, if not more, delightful than the alternatives. So for example, Google Chrome is, a product that we all use probably, and every time you use it, it's just kind of siphoning all your data. And there are already alternatives out there. There's Brave browser, there's DuckDuckGo, and they're getting better and better. And I would say just get familiar with those alternatives and as you try to propose them.
Awesome. Thomas asks, how did you decide to put a default automatic rating on articles users had read rather than having no rating until the user read it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So every app that recommends content out there does this. They all do it. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, they all do it. They all assign a rating to everything you scroll past. The difference is that they don't show it to you. They all have a model of like, this content looks a certain way and has this degree of affinity to the user's interests. That is how you build a recommendation engine. I think our innovation there was just showing people in a way they could understand what we think they like, and then providing the tools to correct that, which is not something you can do easily in other platforms today.
Okay, awesome. Anna asks, how did you discover the phenomenon where negative reviews create unrealistic recommendation expectations? User interviews?
Yeah, we didn't have anything fancy. we didn't have any NPS or any of that. Like we just talked to people. We tried to find people that were representative of a broad enough user base, and we tried to extrapolate themes. And we noticed that very consistently, when someone had encountered something negative that they wanted to remove from their algorithmic kind of identity, they felt really strongly about it. And when the app was not able to meet that expectation, then that started to erode the trust. So our goal was, above all, to keep users' trust. So we just did a lot of interviews and kind of user intuition from there.
Yeah, it sounds like that was a very core principle to it. So, well, that's all the questions. Let's give it up for Gabriel again. Thank you.
Thank you.